So good evening, everybody. It's a nice winter, heading into middle of winter evening, Monday. Well done. So tonight we'll explore some Buddhist concepts and ideas and how hopefully they can help you in your everyday life. And we'll do a couple of meditations. So we'll do a breathing meditation, and then for those who were here last week, we'll also do the Buddha meditation again. So we'll do a couple of meditations. So, and I'm doing a kind of Buddhist presentation, but with the idea that this is for, to use in your everyday life. It's not you have to be Buddhist or even believe or accept all of these concepts or ideas, but it's just something to think about and something to, play around with. And, the Buddha said that you should never just accept, what I say, that you should really take it on open-minded, have an open mind, and then with your own intellect, examine, and what you accept, take on, and what you don't agree with, just let it go. So he said, don't have to rubbish it, just let it go. So that's, I guess, what with these Monday nights, what we invite you to do here is, just have a listen and take on board what you need to take on board that's helpful, and what's not helpful, just let go. So that's, I guess, the spirit of the talk, and Buddhism in general, I think. And the Buddha said he presented the Buddhist path really as this middle way path, this idea that extremes aren't healthy. That extremes, that Buddhism, you try and tread this middle way. And that's the way you kind of, so in a way that's sort of a philosophy to adopt in life, I get it in general terms. And any extreme is kind of where the suffering is, where it's hard, it gets harder, and you cause a lot of problems for yourself. And I think even if we reflect on when we think of the issues, the problems we face as an individual or in the world, when we hear that word extreme a lot, or unprecedented. And I think that's kind of a reflection of this idea that extremes and extreme things and extreme thinking about things isn't helpful. So this idea of a middle way. And from a philosophical point of view, or from a deeper point of view, really, the Buddha really spoke about how all of our problems stem from this idea that we're kind of wired for extreme points of view. And he called it eternalism and nihilism. And we're kind of wired in this idea of eternalism, that we kind of, when we view the world, when we're out in the world, we kind of think the world, things are permanent and unchanging. That they have this kind of inherent nature with them. And then we kind of act with that object in this idea of it being eternally it. Or we can also act in the world, sometimes people or things have this idea of a very nihilistic view of things. That things don't really have any meaning. There's nothing real at all. Things are just whatever we posit is that thing. It doesn't really hold an identity at all. So these are the two real extreme views that he was talking about. And that's a lot of his teachings, these are the wisdom teachings that are trying to navigate us through to a more middle way thinking of how things exist and how the world is, and to give us a bit more balanced view and to cut through some of that extremist thinking that we have. And so saying things are inherent, if they're eternal, we're saying that they're inherent. I'll just repeat that. And if we're saying that they're nihilistic, we're kind of positing there's no basis. And so, like I said, from these two extremes within our mind, when we then act out on certain objects, a lot more suffering will happen. So if we hold very strong views that something is something, and then when it changes, what happens? We're shocked. We're upset. Or if we hold very strongly that something could just be anything, when it doesn't actually hold that reality, A, it's not good for our mental health, but B, again, we think, well, I thought you were black and now you're saying you're white. Because I said you were black, you have to be black. But that might not even hold reality. So again, we get shocked. So again, how our view, how we view things, our environment is important and does have an impact. So, and it is always this underlying thing that we have this notion, and we don't examine it very often, that things are permanent, that things are inherent, and we really hold that very strongly, and so again, that's what I said. We act in a way that we expect it to act, and when we don't, we get angry or sad or jealous or whatever that is. So. And it's not that we're saying things don't exist. What we're saying is things exist really from a dependent arising point of view. So something exists because it had a cause and then it had a result. And so the one way you can look at it, and I think last week for those who were here, we looked at the seed. So there is a seed, and if you plant the seed and you have all the right conditions, soil, water, sun, and all of the right conditions, a tree will come. First a little shoot, then a little sapling, and then eventually a tree. So we can't say there was tree, because the tree was actually a sapling, and then it was actually a shoot, and then it was a seed. So it's not inherent tree. It was a whole lot of causes, conditions that came to this point of tree. So tree doesn't exist in and of itself as tree. Tree really came about from these whole lot of causes and condition that made tree arise. And then tree doesn't eternally exist, because if we cut it down, it might become a house, part of a house. It might become furniture. It might become a whole lot of things. Tree is also wood or leaves or bark. So when we break things down, and we think about, well, where is the tree? It really is a whole collection of parts, and it's a whole collection of causes that became tree. So again, this is kind of important when we're thinking about how something exists and how we interact with that thing. It's something that's very dependent on a lot of things. It's something that's changing all of the time. It's something that we can't really put our finger on, because it's also that tree will eventually die and then rot down and become back to the soil. So we can say tree is very valid. If I pointed to it and said elephant, that would be quite nihilistic of me, because we know it's tree. But if I pointed to the sapling and said tree, it's potential tree, it's not tree. If I pointed to the seed, I would say potential tree, but cause of tree, but I couldn't say tree. So, and this is the idea of everything being dependent on causes and conditions, and nothing being in this state of permanent, of inherent. And this is this middle way. So things do exist. We can point to tree. I can see a woody trunk with branches and leaves, and I can say tree. I can't say elephant. That's fake news. And we all have seen fake news and how we think that's quite extreme. And it is extreme because it's a kind of a nihilistic view. I'm saying therefore it is. These are the facts. That's an elephant. I'm telling you it's an elephant. But the facts point to a nice long trunk and a woody thing and bark and leaves and trees. So we can say, no, we all agree that's a tree. So sort of seems strange, but just trying to understand how things do exist in this way through causes and conditions coming about, dependent on a whole lot of factors, creates this kind of middle way view of how things exist, so outside the extremes. And very much things exist in that way. And so the other part of how things exist, which is, I think, we all kind of know, but we don't really think about how that impacts existence or the object or our experiences and how we interact with the world, is our own mind and our perceptions. So things are very much brought about by causes and conditions, interdependent parts coming together. This table is a top of wood and sides and painted red. It wasn't just like this, it came together through a whole lot of causes and condition. A person went out, bought the wood, cut it all up, made it. And now we can call this table or box or whatever. But then when for things to exist as well, they really do actually need our input, our minds. So our minds actually apprehends the object. It's like I was just saying, there's a tree there. There's no tree there. For a tree to there, our mind actually has to apprehend the tree. For something to exist, we have to see, our mind will apprehend that object, and that object then is appearing in our mind. So our minds play a really big role in how we interact with the world and how we interact with objects and people within the world. And again, this is really important when we think of that. So even our mind sees tree, it might, if it was, like they give the example, if it was a bird, that tree would be house, for instance. So a tree also has a lot of different functions and a lot of different meanings. It's not a place for I can admire and that's beautiful or provides food. Well, it does all of those things. But for an animal, it could even be a home. And for me, for it to be a home, I actually have to chop it down and mill it and build something. So also when we see an object, if we're thinking it's very much an inherent, unchanging, permanent object, and then we see that object and in our mind we perceive it as something that maybe it's not quite that, or we perceive it to be permanent and whole, and then we then put on it a whole lot of attributes from our side. And again, we do that through our minds, for our mind. We apprehend the object, and then we put forth a whole lot of aspects onto that. Oh, I like it, I dislike it. And so we have this really labelling of this object and apprehending that object and wanting then to interact with that object. And again, that object exists and it's there, but it's also in a state of flux, and it's also a whole lot of different things to different people. But we think when we view an object that that's how that object is. And so then we get very attached to that view, because we become very idea that this view is very eternal. This is how that object is, and I will be. We can't sort of step aside and say, well, that other being or person, animal, has a very different view of that object, and their perceptions and their experience of that object is also really valid. As long as for the animal the bird that it's a home, that's a valid object for that animal. But we tend to then look at it from our own very selfish, egocentric sort of mind. Well, that's mine, or it's this, or it's that. And then we have this very dislike on this object. And so we kind of lose the reality of the object in that sense. And it's, again, these sort of these then can create extreme views within ourselves upon that object. And in a way, anxiety itself is another extreme kind of view. Because if we have anxiety, we feel that, there's some fear. We obviously have some fear. And that fear may be it's usually based on something real that's happening in our lives, and we feel some level of trepidation or uncertainty or something about what's about to happen or has happened. Something may have happened, and we feel a bit anxious or a bit unsure. But then what anxiety does, it actually imagines a whole lot of things that could happen. Quite extreme views. Based on the real object, we actually use that experience or that object and imagine a whole lot of possibilities. And our mind becomes convinced that is true. Absolutely convinced that is true. Probably because it triggers off a whole lot of physiological responses as well. And then we kind of then feed off that physiological response and this perception in our mind based on something. But we quickly can convince ourselves that is true, and then we buy into this feeling of anxiety that's happening, that's really going to happen, that is actually happening. And we forget to actually step back and say, right now in this point, is that true? So we believe a lot of things about our world and our experience as if they're true, without actually, what part of anxiety is actually happening. Yes, the feeling's uncomfortable, and the feeling may be because there's heart is racing, that's physiological trigger, and there may be some nervousness or mind races. But when you think about that mind, when you think about those that experience of anxiety, what is actually the reality at that point in time? Is that thing happening, or is it definitely going to happen? Or is it actually you using an object and an experience and then imagining that it's going to happen, and then believing that to be quite true and getting stuck in that place? It's definitely going to happen, that this anxiety is real. So I think that's where this sort of analysis can become helpful in trying to understand how we can really get ourselves in these anxious states, and we don't sort of stop to examine, to think, well, what's really happening here? And we kind of believe the feeling and the physiological response and the racing thoughts, we can't tolerate that, because we then convince ourselves that that's real and that's a threat. And so we get stuck. And we haven't sort of really examined, that is that really happening to me now, or is it is it my perception on an object, and I'm putting this perception on the object that all of these things, all of these people are thinking or doing, or this is going to happen. And anxiety, I would call, is quite an extreme mental state. It's not a mental state we stay in all the time. We kind of can come and go into that state. But it's one of the more extreme mental states. So in that way, our perceptions and understanding how we ourselves really, colour the situation. We play a big role in how we view the world and how we then respond to the world. And that's also worth examining. Mentally, my dislike, and anxiety is really about dislike. I don't want that to happen to me. And we get very much caught up in that dislike. This object is like this, and I don't want it to happen to me, and that's really what's going to happen. And then we're in that kind of spiral. So a lot of that actual activity is actually mentally created by ourselves. It's not actually. It's based on some reality. It might be, I don't know, whatever one's anxiety is, but it might be based on a past experience, or that you're not very good at something, or that if you lose something, there'll be financial stress, or you lose a loved one. There is a basis there, but how much is then the actual anxiety itself at the time? How much of that has actually happened that you're actually anxious about? And that's really worth trying to understand. How much have you embellished and believed something to be that thing to be permanent or to be absolute, to be like that. Or if social phobia or something, how much do you believe that those people are thinking that? How much is that coming from your mind versus how much of that is kind of reality? And so, and that's a kind of, that can be very much helpful for then getting control of your mind and of reality, of understanding those things that, the way you're thinking or looking at the situation is feeding this kind of these minds of anxiety. So, and what you want to do is cut them, and not feed those negative mind states. Yes, so and way you can do that is through an analytical meditation, or you can do that through a breathing type meditation. So, from an analytical point of view, you can say, use any kind of your wisdom to think about the situation from a very logical point of view, and then say, well, if I'm anxious because of this thing that's going to happen, is what's happening now in the present. Bring yourself into the present, and that's where that mindfulness is very helpful. In the present is that thing happening now. In the present now is that thing happening. Or is it, okay, so that future that I'm imagining isn't real. The future's not here. That imagined thing isn't real. It can't be real because here I am in the present. And so keep yourself very much in that present state. Very much, then you're in reality. And the more you can then sit in that reality of that present state, then you stop in those thoughts, because those thoughts are about future state. And that future state isn't happening now, it's happening it's mental. It's an imagined. It's put onto the object, that whatever that object out there is, you're putting it on, and you're putting a whole lot of embellishments over it. So it's trying to cut that. Yes, that thing out there exists, there's a lot of causes and conditions, but how you are projecting onto that object is also really feeding that experience of that object. And another sort of meditation we can do today, which I thought, which is another one that it's good with anxiety as well. It probably takes a bit to get used to, but you can do it just with the breath as well. I'll guide that meditation. But another one, especially with anxiety, is to just really basically sit with that mind, even if you're very anxious and it's very uncomfortable, is to really just sit with it again, because the anxiety feels uncomfortable. There's a lot going on in your body with anxiety and in your mind. But if you can then stay with the breath, and you're just then dealing with the physical discomfort, and then you stay with the breath to cut the story, because it's the story that's creating the problems, and the story you're projecting out onto some experience. If you can stop that and then just sit with the physical sensation of anxiety, then you can again work with that. All with this physical sensation will pass. It will pass. If you just concentrate on the physical sensation, you can sit with that. And then if you sit with the breath and you're not feeding that story, then it will settle down itself. It will just slowly settle. The mind will settle itself down naturally. It might take a little bit, and it might feel not great at the beginning. But again, you can say to yourself, the thing isn't happening to me now. I'm sitting safely in my room, in my house, wherever I am. And so it's not happening. So it's only, at the moment, it's just thoughts. So cut the thoughts. That's what you have to really try and cut those thoughts and see how much those thoughts are actually you're projecting onto that object, that experience that's out there, that you're thinking exists in a way that it really doesn't exist in the way that you think it does. And I think with anxiety or anger or whatever those mental states are, we really do believe that object exists in a way. And then we build up this really idea within our mind. So it's really about challenging that idea, and challenging our own selves to break that cycle of buying into our creating anxious mind states. So we'll do the breathing meditation. And again, it's very much just about sitting with the breath. And it really is about accepting, as I said, just accepting things in this moment. It's very much a mindfulness meditation, and really about thoughts come and thoughts go. Thoughts will come and thoughts will go. Don't engage those thoughts. So that's the beginning of this idea of, so if you practice this when you are anxious, and that's when you're already in a loop, and it's hard to sometimes detach from those thoughts, get stuck. So if you practice this meditation, it does help you to accept that thoughts will come in your mind and thoughts will go into your mind. And you begin to realise that that is just natural. The mind is a thinking machine. So, we don't have to worry about thoughts coming or thoughts going, because that's what the mind does. And we don't have to be worried about our thoughts, because our thoughts are stimulated by external input, our experience, our past, our present, our mind. We don't have to reason why we have thoughts. They are just thoughts. And, in that way you can think of them as clouds in the skies. Clouds form, and they form these funny forms. They don't stay very long, and then they break up again and they reform. There's lots of dependent arising why that happens, because of the wind and all those things up there, what's happening in the sky, where the person could tell you there's lots of things that are creating those forms. But it doesn't really matter, they're just clouds. And we accept that they're just clouds, and that they can come and go, and the sun is still there shining behind them. So again, when you're doing meditation, it's a really good idea just to have this view of thoughts as just thoughts, just clouds, just thoughts. As soon as you invest in those thoughts, you're not meditating. But again, if you start to think, oh my God, I'm thinking about them, again, that's fine, because that's what we do. Our minds are thinking machines, and we are people. As people, we want to engage in those thoughts. So again, just understand that that is part of learning to meditate, is that you'll engage and then you'll disengage. And so it's really good not to be judgy on yourself, because then you're starting to get tight, and that will again close down the meditation. So, and if the anxiety thoughts, if you've got anxiety and it's the thoughts that are going around, challenge that. These are thoughts. These are thoughts about something that I'm worried is going to happen. I'm sitting here now, right here now. So I'm just going to stay in the now, because it's not happening in the now. So bring yourself to the now, because that's where reality, that's where now is happening. Future is really just an idea. It hasn't happened. Past is gone. Can't bring it back, you can't change it. So the future and past states are very much mental. They have an impact, but we can't really change them. All we can really do is work with what's now. And so that's what the mindfulness is really about. It's in the now is where is the reality, is this is now. And so in our mind, that's where we have the most power and control, is with our mind in the now. Everything else is just, if you're having nice daydreams or you're having fun with your friends, then your mind's happy, and that's fine. But if your mind gets strong with anger or negative states, then you have to train your mind to be able to break out of those states, or to have that peaceful time with your mind. And I think the breathing meditations are really good, because it helps you get to be able to sit with your mind, to get comfortable with your own mind. And it's not something that we do. and something to be able to sit in the now with your mind and let thoughts come and go, not invested in them, really much like clouds in the sky. That's what they are, just thoughts. So you're really giving your mind a rest because you're not thinking of those thoughts and going over, enumerating what happened, what didn't happen. So you're really giving yourself that break and trying to just calm the mind down and find some peace in the mind. So, and that's really how simple it is just accepting what comes and letting it go. And following the breath, and then you can always anchor yourself on the breath, because the breath will just give you an anchor. And if you notice thoughts, just say to yourself, there's a thought. And if you don't engage that thought, the thought itself will really just disappear, because you're not... A thought is only when you engage it, and then it leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next. But a thought in itself has no energy or power. And that's one thing to remember with anxiety. Those anxious thoughts seem to have a lot of energy and a lot of power. Same with anger or too much desire. We actually seemed like they're controlling us. You'll see in meditation, and that's what you can go back to when you're experiencing really full-on states. If you're used to seeing that those thoughts themselves they have the energy you give it. Who's leading who. Thoughts will have the energy you give them. So again, meditation in the now and the breath is really that time to just let thoughts do their thing without giving them power and control over you. And that can then help you when you come to points in life when things get difficult or challenging. You've got that practice to go back in to help cut some of those out of control mind states like anxiety or depression or anger and things like that. And also then you can bring yourself into the reality of now, and see how you're embellishing. And that's what I was going to do. I was going to do a little we'll do a little analytical meditation first, actually. Just to see how much we are embellishing with things. So we'll do a bit of an analytical meditation, and then we'll have a break, and then we'll do a bit of a breathing meditation. So just get a bit comfortable in your seating. Just important to have a straight back. Take a few deep breaths if you want. Breathe out. Relax your shoulders. Relax your jaw. Just try and get your body to relax. So this is just a little analytical meditation, just to try and understand how our perceptions and the role they play in our understanding of things or people. So think of something that you treasure. It can be a person or a thing. And think really hard about the details of that object. Its colour, shape, smell, its texture, its sound. And think about your relationship to that object, how you experience it. And think of the feelings that that object evokes in you. And think of all the reasons you like that object. So really try and feel strongly that object. Really feel that. So this object you're very familiar with, ask yourself, can you experience this object or person without mentally knowing that object through your mind? Is there another way of knowing the object other than your senses, your feelings and your thoughts? And so how much of this object comes from your own perceptions about, how much about this object actually comes from your own perception of the object, your emotions, about what you've built up about the object. And do others perceive this object exactly like you do? Or is their experience of the object based on their mind, on their perceptions, on their experience? Has your relationship with this object changed over time? And how much did that come from your side, you changing your mind about the object? So it's just a little analytical exercise to see how we sometimes think something is the way it is, but we forget that so much of how we experience the world is actually from our own side, projecting outwards. And that everybody is doing that, and we all have to be kind about our opinions and our experience. And that's quite, and it changes. How we saw an object 2 years ago, it couldn't be inherently that, because even our own notion of that object changed. It's there, but it will change. So does anyone have any questions about that or want to share experience? Or? Yes, Trevor.
A little bit of object, and sometimes you get, to me, it's small wonderment of the object.
Mm-hmm.
So then you try to figure out wonderment.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at it and perhaps like a part and you go, yeah, well, that is wonderful.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's good. To have wonder is a joy. That's a kind of a joy. As long as it's a joy, we and that's the idea. We want to experience positive experiences. Yeah, yeah. It's when you get attached to that object, when you think it's going to give you a level of happiness because you think that object is perfect, and when you have that object, then you're going to be happy forever, possibly That object can't do that. That might be a little bit from our side thinking it can. Yeah. But we keep believing they can because we keep shopping. All right. And that's the idea, you know, it's just to get a little bit of reality check, you know, if we believed all the sales pictures in the world, which funnily we do, you know, I don't know why, but we do. You know, this idea is to actually say, well, you know, maybe not eternal happiness if I have that pair of shoes or whatever it is that you need to have. But absolutely we can enjoy things. Absolutely we can, and we should, because, you know, objects there and it's there to be enjoyed if it's something, friendships, all of those things. If we think our friends will never change or have an opinion that we should like, then that's the point, I think. You know, they will change because they're subject to their own minds and experiences and delusions. So, you know, often we get anxious about things we can't control, you know, and we're imagining all these things. Yeah. So it's just... So we'll do a little bit of a breathing meditation. And again, this is the simple breathing meditation. Basically, we're just going to sit there and we're just going to let the breath come in and out and keep our attention on the breath as much as we can. And just be fine with whatever comes. Really not judgmental. Just be fine. Even if the thought's unpleasant, then say it's just a thought. You know, an unpleasant thought cannot harm us. And I think, you know, an unpleasant thought cannot harm us. Catastrophizing itself cannot harm us. That's anxiety. And so if we can sit there with that, even with those thoughts coming and going, or busy day thoughts, or shopping list thoughts, again, that's you know, that's fine. As long as don't start doing the shopping list, then you've got out of meditation. But if you can just sit there, not doing the shopping list, even if you see those shopping list thoughts coming or the next day plans, but just let them go, because they can't keep themselves going. We keep them going. And so it's just about getting a bit of peace and a bit of presence within the mind. So we'll try that for a few minutes, and we can usually only do that for a few minutes, and then we're off on the shopping list or the day's plans. So, you know, and that's enough. That just gives us a little bit of a break and starts to let us feel comfortable just with our mind. Not always having to be distracted, you know, to make friends with our mind. It's a nice thing. So we'll just take a few settling breaths and just either count breaths, if you're a counting person. You might like to feel the sensation of the air on your nostril, or you might like to imagine the breath coming and going from your nostrils. So now I'll lead a Buddha Shakyamuni meditation. And the purpose of this meditation is really to generate love and compassion in our minds, which are very positive mental states. And again, if you are feeling anxious at the time, this would probably be a really nice meditation to do, because you can imagine the white light coming down, pushing out all of those thoughts. So we can set a motivation for this meditation, that I wish to help all beings, including myself, be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So above the crown of your head, imagine Buddha Shakyamuni. He is seated on a lotus throne, which has a sun and moon cushion. And these symbolize the three principal aspects of the path to enlightenment, which are renunciation, bodhicitta, and wisdom. Imagine that Buddha is golden in colour. His body is filled with light that radiates out in all directions. He has black hair, which is on top of his head, and a top knot. He has a beautiful face. His eyes are half open and gazing out. He's seated in the lotus posture, full leg cross, and he's wearing saffron robes of a monk, and he has a begging bowl in his left hand, and with his right hand he's touching the ground. Buddha Shakyamuni is very beautiful and light-filled, so he sits just above the crown of your head, and his whole body is filled with light, and he's gazing out serenely with a compassionate gaze towards you and all other living beings. So you can imagine that all the people you love are sitting around you, and all of the strangers and all people around of the world can be sitting spread out for miles. So all of you are enjoying this meditation. So feel the presence of the Buddha and remember his qualities and that he is there to help you. And ask him to help you to be free from all negative energies, ignorance and problems, mental states, and that you develop wisdom and that you gain the realizations on the path to enlightenment. So the Buddha accepts your requests, and then from his heart, light radiates down, and it enters through your crown, top of your head, and it completely fills your body and all the beings around you, all your loved ones and friends and family. All the light streams out as well to them. All people of the world, animals. And all of your negativities are washed away. And your body is filled with light. So just hold this visualization, the light streaming down from Buddha, through your crown, into your body. Washing away negative mind states. And doing the same to all beings without discrimination. So feel your body filled with the Buddha's light, which is the mind of enlightenment. So his mind is totally purified. And that blessing coming down through to you. Now the Buddha dissolves into light and he enters into the crown of your head and into all beings. He descends to your heart. And that essence Buddha light is merged in with your mind stream. And when you're ready, you can come out of the meditation. Right, any questions? We've got some time.
Margie, I think we're all deluded. It's just a matter of degrees, isn't it?
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
I struggle with that.
In what way?
Oh, I get it, I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, that's true. From a Buddhist perspective, we would say, yes, we are all deluded. Yeah, 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 we would say that. But it's just at what level? you know, and that we can work with that. Yeah, degrees, you know, and we all have our ups and downs. So it's about giving some tools. So when the hard times come, that you can work with that. Yeah, definitely. Just tools to work with your mind. Yeah. But yeah. And that we all have our good days and bad days, you know. And that's normal, that's very much the human condition, you know, I think. Yeah. So it's just about having some tools, you know. And there's lots of tools that we use, you know. Love and compassion always helps subdue our mind and makes us feel more relaxed and more receptive and open to others. You know, the analytical ones try and cut some of that exaggerated thoughts that we have. And the breathing one, makes us more comfortable in our own mind, so we're less distracted or, needing external validation all the time. But we're not alone. Yeah, it's so true. It's very simple, and it's not easy. That's true. So true. Yep. So true. And then we kind of, like the Buddhists say, you have to look at it from the point of view that the patient, the doctor, the medicine, the nurse. So if we're the patient, and the instructions are the medicine. Well, and the person giving the instructions, the Buddha, was the doctor, and the nurse were the Sangha, the teachers. But if you don't take your medicine, so it's, that's often the way, isn't it? There's we have to do the actions. Any other questions? Any concerns? Do people understand that explanation? Yeah, good. Sure. Yeah. Today some of those teachings are the wisdom teachings, and they can be quite complex. And confusing. So, but anyway, that's okay. That's fine. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. A very attentive audience, and some nice meditations, I hope. And keep it simple. But, take your medicine. That's the problem. We're all deluded. We all need the medicine. All right. Thank you, everybody.